Welcome to the Australian Boarding Schools Summit, and our discussion today is about how best to capture the opportunities of boarding school for regional and remote students and children. And our panellists have a wealth of lived experience and professional experience in the sector, so I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'd like to introduce them to you now. We have the Honourable Fiona Nash. Many will know Fiona as a long-standing member of the Australian Senate and Federal Government Minister. Over the course of 12 years, Fiona held portfolios in regional health, regional development, regional communications and local government. So she has some serious street cred as an advocate for regional Australia, which also comes from having been involved in a family farming operation for many years as well. Since leaving the Senate, Fiona has been CSU's, Charles Sturt University, Strategic Advisor on Regional Engagement, and she's now the Regional Education Commissioner. She's also a mum of 2 boys who are now running the family farming operation, and I'm sure she won't mind sharing with you that she's also recently become a grandma for the first time. Peter Gibbs. Peter's story is one of extraordinary highs and lows, but ultimately of triumph. And if I could give a shameless plug to the Boarding Schools Expo Destination Boarding podcast, check it out. Peter's story is one that is certain to touch your heart. Currently, Peter is the General Manager of REID, which is the Regional Enterprise Development Institute. That's a not-for-profit organisation working in the Indigenous enterprise and community development sector. So you wear many hats. Peter is a proud Gamilaroi man, born and raised in a tiny little blip on the map called Wheelmaringal. He's the founder of iProud, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, Indigenous Policing Out West, Our Way Delivery. And that's an organisation that provides pathways for Indigenous people wanting to go into the police force. And that came out of the tragedy of Peter's sister Fiona's death in custody in Brewarrina. He's a passionate advocate not only for the Indigenous community but for regional communities in general. He's deeply passionate about promoting education. He's been an elite level rugby league player, a shearer, a ministerial advisor at both state and federal level, and that's just to name a few of his many and varied accomplishments. He's also a former boarder and a former boarding parent. And finally, joining us today is James Cleaver. Now, he's been described by the member for Dubbo and Minister for Agriculture, Dougal Saunders, as a true son of rural New South Wales. James is a proud bogan, and I mean that in the nicest possible way, having grown up in the family farming operation at Ningen. He also has a number of accomplishments under his belt, including being named the 2019 Royal Agricultural Society's Rural Achiever, and in 2020 was the UNE Rising Star. He has a degree in economics law, and with that he began his post-uni years as a solicitor, but he soon realised that his place in the world belonged more in the advocacy space for regional Australia. And he's held a number of positions within stakeholder management with the DPI, Department of Primary Industries, where he is now, and I'll get this correct, now the coordinator of the Regional Office for Youth. He spent 6 years as a boarder in Sydney, and again, I hope he won't mind me letting you know that he's just become a dad for the first time. So welcome everybody. So thank you all for joining us, and I'd like to ask by starting with your own experience of boarding school and the boarding school community. Now, Peter, you were a student at a regional college. Can you tell us about your experience there, coming from a little community like Wheelmaringal?
Well, Wheelmaringal, 300 people when we're all there, going to a school with 300 boarders, let alone day students. So even the trip from Wheelmaringal to Forbes in those days seemed like such a long way away from our little community. It was a dusty ride in a car, and then a bus that meets another bus, and then a bus that meets another bus. And as the crow flew, probably just a few hours, but for us as in our age, 11 to 12 years old, it seemed like a long, long way, even interstate or maybe even into another country. Because when we finally get there and then school starts next day, it was a different life. One day running around a riverbank, literally with no shoes, no shirt, snotty nose, to going into a school with you need to be formally dressed. And
wearing a tie every day.
well, I remember the first thing on Sunday afternoon was get my hair cut, and that was a difficult thing. But it wasn't cut for 2 or 3 years. So to get ready for school on Monday was a bit of a dramatic experience. But wow.
So it felt a long way from home, not only geographically but culturally as well.
Oh, massively. And but it was my great grandfather's commitment to the future of our community is that education was going to be the key. It was going to be the focus to move us away from previously just stopping at year 6 and working in the agricultural industry at that time, to have an education that would be a different future and give us more options, and that's exactly what's happened.
And Fiona, you were a day girl in Sydney, but your sons went to a boarding school. What was your transition from the experience as a day girl to being the boarding mum?
Really interesting and very different. So grew up in Sydney and hence was just a day girl at school when I went through. But by the time I had the boys and they were getting to high school age, at that stage we were living out in Central West, and just really landed on that boarding was going to be the best option for them. So they went to Canberra Grammar and it was absolutely fantastic. And the difference, I think, with that boarding experience compared to what I knew as a day girl was that sense of community that the boys got from being a boarder, as well as everything academically that schools have on offer. It was just that real as well as, and they absolutely loved it. Both of them had 6 years there and just loved it.
And James, you also came from the Great Western Plains to Sydney. How do you remember that transition? Your siblings also went away as well.
Massive transition. So I don't know about the other two, but I was the homesick child for the, year 7, probably spent the whole year crying on the phone, Mum, please come take me home, and then getting off the phone and going playing with my friends and forgetting about that conversation completely in general.
So it's just a guilt trip for your parents,
making sure that they knew that was the case, and I made this big transition. But it was massive, and I suppose my parents wanted me to see that transition. That was a huge part of why I was sent away to school. Coming from the town of Nyngan, there's a huge amount of opportunities there to do stuff within the regions, and there's plenty of space to grow. But you don't always get that variety of people and opportunities there as well. So that was a huge reason why my parents said, we'd like to send you away, give you some more opportunities outside of what you've already seen.
And that glimpse over the fence into other backyards, how have you used that experience in the roles that you've had since leaving school and leaving uni?
I think in a lot of ways I've taken confidence out of it, just seeing over the fence and seeing what other people are like. I think in a lot of ways the boarding school it's a great equaliser, because you're plonked in one room, and at the end of the day it doesn't matter what background you come from. You're all sleeping in that same room, you're all working in that same little community, and you form your relationships off the back of that. It makes you confident that you could be anyone from that very beginning, because you're all starting out at the same spot. So I've taken that, I suppose. I approach stuff with a huge amount of confidence. Sometimes it's a little bit ignorant, and you hit stuff headlong and you jump into it. But I think that confidence has been a huge key to success in a way, and I get that from thinking that we're all the same to start with.
And Fiona, for your boys, that exposure to diversity has been important for them as well?
Absolutely, and I think for them, going to boarding school, boarding in Canberra, they were exposed to an incredibly broad and diverse range of people, and I think particularly Canberra, because there was a real different set of family backgrounds and different set of people that were coming from all over the place. So being Canberra, there were a lot of children of diplomatic people from all around the world, and farmers from people from farming families down the road. So that real mix, and I think what it does, and certainly did for my boys, it makes you very understanding that people are different, that not everyone's the same, and that different people will be different about different circumstances and different environments. And I think that was really important, and makes them just see outside the square a bit.
And Peter, for a little Aboriginal kid coming from Wilmaringal, that transition for you must have been quite extraordinary, particularly back in the 70s when you made that transition. Things are a little different now. How has how did you see the experience change from when Daniel, your son, became part of a boarding community and you as the parent. Are there any differences that you can note between those two experiences?
Oh, but most definitely, because in Wilmaringle, 99% of the community was Aboriginal. We had non-Aboriginal school teachers and people who ran the store and maybe some of the farmers in and around, but predominantly our community was Aboriginal community. So to move into even into the boarding side of the school, we were just a small group of Aboriginal kids in the boarding school community, let alone when day students came next day, which for me was the biggest eye-opener, because when I stood at the bus terminal and watching all the buses come and all these kids getting off the bus to come to school, I thought we'd been run over by white people. There was just people everywhere. But as you look at it, it's only less than 600 people.
Yeah.
But for us, it's a lot of people in the one place at the one time. And I was a lot younger than most, so I started school a little bit earlier because we had to in the bush. We had to start school early because there's nothing else to do. So even though Wilmaringle only went to year 6, they started some of us earlier, with preschool, to give us somewhere to get into an educational sort of setting. And I know all of that put together has given me the greatest look at life. And now I had no hesitation when it was my opportunity to support my children. Boarding school was always going to be on the agenda because of my experience.
And I just wanted to stay with you for a sec, Peter, because you've said in the past that the experience of being at boarding school and being at that college gave you opportunities that you may not have otherwise had. You didn't always make the best choices when you left school, but how did you get through those bad choices, and how did that confidence that you had help you to get through those choices?
I think confidence
And
is
if you
that
don't
word.
mind me asking, to explain what some of those choices were.
No, absolutely. I think James is right when he nailed about confidence. Confidence is everything. And, you know, yes, we cried almost every night too with that homesickness, but our families had made some differences. Our families back home had made some real differences in the community in the way we would communicate. So we didn't even have a phone. So what they did was set up a phone. They worked with whoever it was, got a phone in the community so that we could actually have some communication literally to help us through, right? So I think isolation in many ways helped us because it was so difficult, and then it propelled you to get out there amongst the other boys and start to use some of the things that's on offer, like canoeing, like all those post-school sport opportunities and the other activities that the school had to offer. And the thing that for me that nailed it was that our school had shearing there. So that's where we lived. We lived in a shearing shed. When we weren't running around the community, we were in a shearing shed. So I felt like home. Once I got connected to what was there, I was living, everything changed. But confidence, the confidence that I could perform academically, but I think for me, the one thing that stood out was sport. I could play organised sport. I never wore footy boots before. Then I got to get dressed up like a footballer and have that dream that I had on a little clay pan at Wilmaringle to be a rugby league player. That's where that aspiration came from, and the school gave me that opportunity to pursue that. That's what helped me with some of the real difficult things that came into my life later. I'd been through hard times, I've had challenges, but it was education and the dream and from those the aspirations that I had and the dreams that I had came from my time at boarding school. And I was able to come back to that in really important parts of my life when decisions needed to be made about the future. I know that was the platform that I built it on.
So if you hadn't had that confidence, you may not have been able to get through those tough times.
I wouldn't be here today, without a doubt. Without a doubt, I don't believe what I was able to get in my life as a real strong platform, because I'd lost my mum before I went away. Things were very unstable back in our community. My dad was a young father of 4, just lost his wife, but our focus on education and not just becoming another member of the community that was just going to be a shearer, more than likely take the wrong track. Education was the absolute answer, and that early time is absolutely standing me in good stead today.
And Fiona, for you, with in your role as regional commissioner, how do you see that the role of boarding school options for particularly for isolated and rural, remote kids? And
Yeah,
students?
and I think the word there that's really important in education is options.
Yeah.
And that there are opportunities there for people, and I'm talking specifically like rural and regional remote. That's my job as Regional Education Commissioner. My heart is what I do anyway. So very much the non-metropolitan. But it's about having those options. And when I went into the role as Regional Education Commissioner, I just thought to myself, what is it that you want to really try and achieve in doing that? And it's making sure that people in rural and regional and remote Australia, no matter where they live, have opportunity to the education that they need to reach their full potential. Now, full potential would be very, very different, and people, young people will be suited to different types of schooling all over the place, but it's about those options that you were talking about. So I think having options and ability to make choices about young people's education is really, really important. And from my perspective as Commissioner, obviously our isolated families, we talk a lot in general in communities in life about boarding and boarding options. For them, it's actually not an option. They don't have a choice. And so it's looking at it, well, that boarding school is their only option. But I look at those people living out in those regions and they are making such a massive contribution to the nation's economy. So often in the industries they're working in and what they're doing, and they're the engine of the nation in a lot of areas. And yet they have these circumstances where they have absolutely no choice about their children's schooling. So they've either got to send them to boarding school, or they have to, sometimes set up a second home if they can't do the boarding, but sometimes they'll do that boarding and they'll just have them go day from a second home. So we don't really think very often from their perspective, as parents who go, here's boarding, it's a choice for us. It's not a choice for them. And also for a lot of the Indigenous remote communities as well, boarding is the only option for them as well. Exactly the same set of circumstances, and Pete's a really good example of that. And from my perspective as Commissioner is, how do we make it easier for those families who have no choice but to send their children away to boarding school, and how do we give them the options and opportunities that they need and that they deserve as young people out in the regions?
And this plays into what you do, James, as coordinator of the Office of Youth. Options are really important for youth. How do you see the boarding schools communities fitting into those options?
Well, I suppose, Office of Regional Youth for a second, our vision is that kids in rural areas have the same opportunities that kids in urban areas do. And it's quite hard to fulfil just down to geographic isolation. But again, options, I came from a background where there was only one other male in my year at school. And so it came back to the point where I was hanging out with the year above me to try and get some more exposure to different people, and I'd probably outgrown the school in a bit of a way. And my parents are going, "Oh, we need options. We need to be able to send James somewhere to be able to get to and to be challenged." I think I was getting to a point in life where things were coasting a little bit, and we talked about that transition before. I sort of got smacked in the face pretty quickly with that transition going, all of a sudden you're not just this big fish in a small pond.
But that doesn't hurt a kid either, does it? That realisation.
Yeah, huge opportunity, and you go, well, there's more there. There's more there to if you tackle that challenge, you can go again. And you open it up. You talk about extracurricular activities. It's not just your rugby and your cricket and your rugby league. You can be canoeing, you can be, we've got all these outdoor recreation programs that they have these days. There's plenty of opportunities to shine outside of just that normal school curricula, which boarding schools give you those extra options.
You're touching on a point that I wanted to come to later, but we'll deal with it now. Boarding and schooling and education as a whole, boarding schools or otherwise, it's not just about academia and what goes on in the classroom, is it? It's a holistic approach. Pete, you would agree with that? It's the whole person. Education is the whole holistic.
Well, absolutely it is. The networking, the people who you start off in year 7, and if you get the chance to complete school with them, that's 6 years of working with another young bloke, in my case, and all of their families, and you get to meet people who have gone on to do wonderful things in business, or you'll meet politicians people in business, people in sport. There hasn't been a facet of my life where I haven't met someone who I've went to school with. Some of those people have been so important in my life in that really insignificant time of about 11 to 14 when I really needed to get some mates to help me through. And there are so many. I've been involved in community life for now over 30 years, and there wouldn't be a week that goes by that I don't come across somebody that I've got connected with that schooling time. So it is so important to reach out, not just open your eyes. I think I've had many experience of opening my eyes up to the opportunities that's there. But it's actually got somebody to give you the confidence to walk through into those opportunities as well. And it's been my mates from the schooling time who've had job opportunities, been referee support, or give you a reference to something. But also then sometimes sit you down and talk about some of their experiences. We've been able to do so much together as a group from my time way back in the 70s and still alive and well today in 2022.
Fiona, the holistic approach to education is absolutely vital, and I think more recognised now than it used to be. You know, one of the other panellist conversations we had today was about square pegs and round holes, and how fortunately things are beginning to change, and there's a more individualistic approach. That holistic approach to education is important.
Jen, it really is, and I suppose the way I look at it, and I can only really talk about my perspective as my boys and their experience at boarding school, but it teaches them about life, and it's so much more than just academia. It's about how to deal with life, and even simple things like if you're in and it was a fairly small boarding house when my boys started, and if you're in there with a bunch of other human beings day after day after day after day, you have to learn how to deal with people. You have to learn how to deal with change.
And be part of a team.
And be part of a team. And you can't just, have your way and here's life and this is how it's going to work. So I think it really teaches you about life and how to manage it and how to deal with things as they arise.
And that's part of the whole, making good kids great humans. And I know that James, you have been involved in a number of teams. That grounding in teamwork is really important.
There's not many opportunities early on in life where you just get plonked with a bunch of other people and you say, good luck, and you do, and you work
See
out
you at the end of term.
Yeah, that's right. Within 2 weeks, though, those relationships are formed, and it's not very often that there's outliers or people aren't involved within that group. It organically happens. Sometimes you've got to be forced to do that, but there's no better spot than doing that and learning how to form a relationship. And I think, you can be very good at your mathematics, or you can be very good at your English. But I think at the end of the day in business, if you can hold a relationship, if you can establish a relationship, if you can network and speak to other people, you've such foundation to start things off.
And that foundation is something that I know all three of you have employed to give back. And one of the mantras in our house is that we are privileged, yes, but the only time we should ever apologise for that privilege is when we don't use it to give back. Pete, you've given back a lot, and nobody could say you came from a privileged background, but you've had the privilege of that experience in community. How have you used that? And A, do you think it's a privilege? And B, how do you use that to give back?
Yeah, absolutely. I seldom use the word disadvantage when I talk about my community. Seldom use it. Why? Because that's the way in which my family had raised me. So we were absolute privileged to get access to an education system that was there at Wilmaringle from kinder to year 6, and then go on from there. And some of our community now have got doctorates. People have travelled overseas. We've got people from our remote communities who've become Olympians. There is many like me who've got the opportunity to play and achieve your dream. So we know, and I know, that without that opportunity to go away from our little community, if we'd have stopped at year 6 and just became another person on the land there, I wouldn't be, as I said before, I wouldn't be talking to you now. We would be a very different Peter. And I know that because all the examples are there.
What would be the Peter, that sliding doors moment? Who would Peter Gibbs be if you hadn't had that experience?
I certainly wouldn't be a person with the education that I have. My mum and my dad were both illiterate. Why? Because they were products of the schooling system at the time, which was finish at year 6, go and work agriculture. And in that, when I say agriculture, I'm saying, you know, fencing, shearing, that's about the limit of it. When you talk from a Will Maringle perspective. The opportunity to go away and start to develop my football skills particularly, I never got the opportunity, I wouldn't have got the opportunity to go away and get the confidence of playing in Sydney and all the benefits that has given me. That's even another world that I only dreamt about. It's a very confident Peter. I can sit here and do this amongst my colleagues and be very confident. That wouldn't have been the same person. The opportunity to work in Parliament, it would be very difficult if I was living in my little remote community, just shearing away today, illiterate, with no commitment to education. My children wouldn't have an education because I'd never had a commitment to education. So when my pop had the vision for education for his people, I want to pass that on. I want that legacy to be passed on. I want to be as passionate about education that he was, and that we just don't see that we're always talking about disadvantage. I don't want that to be part of my vocab. I want it to be about opportunity. And our country affords that to all of us. No matter what walk of life we come from, the opportunity is there. But you have to take the opportunity, otherwise it'll pass you by. And as we know, all the examples in my community are there. I don't need to look and cast aspersions anywhere else. I just look at my own family and community, and that's my motivation to keep saying that education is the key.
And Fiona, when you hear Peter talk about disadvantage or not considering disadvantages, is that important in that whole space of developing community?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think if you start using words like disadvantage, and really interesting, Peter, I was just having this discussion last week with somebody in relation to my commissioner role and saying, I really dislike using the word disadvantage because it just starts from this deficit point that things are wrong, rather than looking at what are the opportunities for people who might be in certain circumstances and looking at what the good things are in those circumstances. Things are really important, because if you label somebody disadvantaged, from my perspective, as a mother and as a commissioner, is you're putting them in a backward spot to start in the first place. Having said that, it's not that you're not recognising very challenging circumstances that a lot of people are in, but it's really important, and Peter used it as well, just this notion of opportunity. And I think as decision makers, and Peter's worked in Parliament, and I've been in Parliament, and clearly James is now in a very, very significant decision making role with what you're doing with your job. It's important that the decision makers understand that they're so often in charge of creating that opportunity and making sure that that's there.
And James, in your role, and Fiona's just touched on this, you are part of the decision making. So I want to just ask you about that idea of not calling it disadvantage, but recognising the challenges that exist for regional youth, and how maybe do you draw on your own experience of a boarding community and your education to help, to borrow a term, close that gap?
Yeah, really good question. Really good question, and it's something that that we've got to work hard on. And I think there's a lot of historic things that have gone on in the past that, you know, it's not something you fix, you know, overnight. And it's you know, you come in, you've got to be very careful working in a government organisation. You don't all turn up in your suits when something's happened and you go, all right, yeah, we're going to come in and we're going to fix the world because you guys have a problem. You know, I think there's
Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It does, absolutely. It does. And usually, you know, we last a term of government or something like that, or a funding cycle, and then we move on, and the next group does it again 4 years later. So we've got to be really, really careful of that. So I suppose with any of our work that we try to do in our communities is we start upstream. We try to build something instead of, you know, having. And there's plenty of organisations that do, having the GPs and the counsellors and the psychologists at one end, which are picking people up at the pointy end, which is very, very important. It's trying to put some things in place which are going to make our communities better to live in, give kids opportunities early on to excel in what they do, and you know, explore what's out there in the world. We're very lucky. I think COVID in a way has changed the world that we live in. No longer are you that far away when you're in your Teams or a Zoom call away, and roles can now be based out here as well. So it's not you go down to a boarding school or you go away to a boarding school and you can't have an executive role or you can't have a high business role. You could bring that back to our communities, and I think we'll see more and more of that as time goes on. So I suppose it's keeping those options open. It's letting people know that there's the ability to access some of these things, and just not having that deficit mindset. I suppose if you can approach it as a challenge, if we can approach it, we're going to tackle this, and also focus on some of the positive things that we've got out here, like plenty of space to grow up. We don't have housing pressures as much as other places in the way of costs. The drive to work, so our parents actually get to spend more time with our young people and parenting. I think we can go. Let's market the regions for later on in life. You can go down, take a bit of what's really great at boarding school, and then bring it back to our regions and help us thrive out here as well.
How can boarding schools be part of that giving back and bringing people back to regional areas? And your son, Daniel, has made a significant contribution to his alma mater in terms of smoothing the path for Indigenous kids to go. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, I think that's what we've sowed in him, that it's always about giving back. Whatever you do, it's about giving back to your community. Our community needs contributors, and we all have to contribute. And when we get opportunities and we go away and take the privilege of the things we can do in our country, we have to then have obligations. I think there is necessary obligations about supporting your community from there. And that's what he's done. I think he's been able to set up a legacy for himself, because the Indigenous kids coming to Scott's...
That's all right, keep going.
Indigenous students coming to his school, how will I say it? Can't say Scots. So,
No, that's all right.
so Indigenous students coming to school in the future will be able to participate in an induction program that he put together. And he and I spoke a lot about the sorts of elements of that program, but fundamentally it was his program. And I think that's fantastic. That is just from his own experience, looking through his own lens, the difficulties of life, of moving away from family, but the opportunities that arises from it. And that's what his program is about. From the outset, the other students, future students, will be able to see that when you come and experience this opportunity, embrace it. Get through the homesickness. These are some of the things that you're going to experience. So helping future students to overcome some of their difficulties, but it's all temporary. That's his message, it's all temporary. Because after that, you're going to see, and what he saw, and he was been able to do so many things. And we've got that history now for him to work off the back of. So straight out of school, it wasn't coming and laying around for 12 months, it was straight into apprenticeship. I want to achieve that builder's dream, and I want to get it done now. That all came from the time he's been away. He still doesn't know how to make a bed. What we can address, this. I will at some point in time.
Fiona, in terms of return on investment for regional communities, the boarding school experience is invaluable.
Look, it really is. Although I'd preface that by saying, back again to the opportunity and the options, there's a lot of young people who the best option and opportunity for them is staying home, is staying in their community. Yeah. And in those circumstances, as Commissioner, what I'm really keen on looking at is how do we better give them opportunities to be homegrown and stay in their communities. But what I see from the boarding experience and those young people who do go away and come back, one of the things that I have learned over many decades in regional Australia is regional communities thrive when there's leadership. And I think the leadership qualities that you see in young people that have been away to school, been away to boarding school and come back again, that is something they can really give back to their communities. And I watch so many young people, and it's not to say leadership qualities don't exist in the young people who stay home as well, but it's a different type of thing. So the more experiences you bring into that regional community, the stronger the community is going to be. And I think, you know, watching now young people coming back to the regions, and they're really starting to come back in droves, whether it's from school or being away for a bit, and they bring this breadth of experience and they bring this breadth of thinking, and that contributes to their local community, and that's what contributes in so many ways to having those strong communities going forward.
And James, you from a younger perspective, have you seen a drift coming back? You know, that trend being reversed?
Well, I live here in Dubbo amongst a lot of young professionals at the moment, which are people from the regions who have returned, and they're in the service industry and servicing the Greater Western Plains. So it's definitely there.
And we've shaken that monkey off our backs, isn't it? You don't. There's no longer this idea that you have to stay in the metropolitan areas.
Correct.
We're working in this regional Department of Regional New South Wales. We've got people based all over New South Wales, and we've been in a training session throughout the week, and I was having dinner with a couple of them last night, and they've just said, you know, our lives have changed because we're working in the regions. We're taking up this regional lifestyle. We're not in the hustle and bustle of Sydney. We're still doing our jobs, everyday jobs, but all of a sudden we're reconnecting with community. We're spending more time with our kids. We feel a part of something rather than a number down in a city at times, which you can be. I notice I suppose we keep talking about these opportunities that you are created for regional kids when they leave boarding school. I suppose we give a lot back to those boarding schools when we go there as well. I think that's really important to address. You know, kids go down there and they're mixing with some of these city kids that are there, and we turn up and we're often kids that take a bit of initiative, and we have a bit of resilience because we've dealt with floods and bushfires and fires and everything else. So you get down there, and I think that mixing of cultures is a huge...
So you're getting, the country kids are giving the city kids a glimpse over that back fence as well.
Absolutely, and
Literally.
even just, I love my footy, but on a footy field alone, the first 15 coach used to say, we need more country kids in this team just to toughen it up a little bit and bring that mentality. So, you know, I think you're offering something as well, and they need us as much as we need them.
And Jen, if I can jump in there, I think it's a really good point, and there's a bigger picture angle to this. And I think for the nation's social fabric, the more the city understands the country, and the more the country understands the city, the better as a nation we're going to be. So in a way, a boarding house, exactly what James is just saying, kind of does that in a microcosm, and it's terrific.
So schools can really be a part of bridging that city-country divide, yeah?
Oh, well, take it from an Aboriginal perspective. You don't realise it at the time, but how much of a contribution you do make in building understanding. And, you know, there's some really good examples where senior students who've benefited from that have gone back to some of these remote communities and invested in through their business models, and you know, so you then see that cycle just perpetuating, and that's what we've seen. So great point, James. I think that is it's a pertinent point, and I didn't actually look at it myself through that lens, but you can see. You can really identify that you make a significant contribution in building better understanding between our people and the broader community, and Daniel's program at his former school is testament to that.
And it used to be, in the good old bad old days, that Aboriginal kids from Indigenous communities went to be changed. Now they're going to be the agents of change themselves, which I think is a wonderful shift. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely agree. Nothing about changing anything. It's about lifting us up, encouraging us, giving us a stronger platform to work from for the rest of our lives. It's why your family sends you there so that you can experience that. And then when you get the opportunity to embrace it, and now at my age, you can look back and say, without that, I wouldn't be doing the after things I would have done in my life. Absolutely, without a doubt.
But I think James's point was that the Aboriginal kids are the teachers themselves to a degree now, which I think is wonderful because it's giving those glimpses
And just
into the diversity.
on that, as a 30-year-old white fella, there's so much I can learn. Like, and I'm going, if I'm a kid at a school, that connection to country that you can learn, like that rich,
Yeah.
deep connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have, that's something that you know, I love learning about and want to learn more and more about. And that opportunity to actually sit in that for a while and, you know, not have awkward conversations, having it
Yeah.
everyone at a level and all at the same level, you know, a huge thing to offer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jen, that exposure to diversity, and I love in To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee, there's that great line about being able to put yourself in another man's skin. And I think that diversity of exposure to different people, different cultures, different ideas, I think for young people really lets them learn how to put themselves in somebody else's skin. And I think that's a really, really big thing.
I think we could talk all day, and I wish we could. One final thing, a question to all of you. How do you think we're going in terms of addressing that misconception that boarding school is for the elite? It's a tough question. Let me start with the Commissioner for Regional Education.
We're getting there, but it's still there.
And is it a misconception?
Look, it depends what your perspective is, I guess, Jen. Whether it's elite or not elite, and you know, it costs money to go to boarding school, so therefore some people would think then that by association that has to be an elite thing. But I've seen so many parents who work so hard and give up so much to be able to give their children that opportunity. And that's not elite, that's really hard work. And I look at all of the Indigenous students coming from their remote communities who have no choice to go to boarding school, that's not elite. I look at all of those isolated families right across the country that have no choice but to send their children to boarding school, that's not elite. And I think the idea of elitism, and you know, it's certainly there. Whether you're looking at boarding schools or anything, often it comes from a lack of understanding of how things work, be it boarding school or anything else. So maybe we need to do a better job as a country of talking about things more, and boarding school is one of them, and all of the opportunities, back to the opportunities again, the opportunities sit there that, you know, if you can, they're wonderful.
James, what would be your...
As a former solicitor and a government worker, your stereotypes follow you everywhere, and they're very, very, very hard to shake. So I think it's something that we're forever going to be working on. It's perspective that boarding schools are going to be up against. And it's important as parents and former students of these schools that we continue to work on that perspective, and that we show humility when we talk about these schools and the opportunities that we've been provided with. I think that's key to everything. If someone's walking around with their nose in the air and they're claiming that they're better than someone else for a certain reason, then that's down to the personality and that perspective.
Exactly, and I think that says more about them than it does about
absolutely.
the school.
And Jen, I often say the minute you think you're better than someone else is the minute you're not.
Yes, yeah, you've just proved it, yeah. And I guess let's give the final word to a guy who breaks that stereotype. What are your thoughts, Pete?
Yeah, I think being humble is that is one of the answers. If you want to play National Rugby League, that's an elite group of people. You have to put so much in to achieve so much. And so I speak to families and students all throughout Western New South Wales, encouraging them to look at the boarding school option, because they're sometimes at despair about what to do about the opportunities they want to afford their children. So I confidently look them in the eye and say, explore this option. Why? Because it's my experience. I lived it as a student. I'm now as a parent, and I now go back and do whatever I can to encourage. Because the opportunity, do not let it go by, because we will regret it in the future. And my story about boarding school is intrinsic to my life. And so I just use that as the example. And I don't look at myself as elitist in any way, shape or form. So I think being humble is the person, because it's all about the individual and the commitment to service your community. I want my son to come back with that attitude, but the opportunity was able to have at a very prominent school was to bring back that experience in education, experience in life, but to come back with a passion and commitment to serve your community. And that's what he's done.
I said that was the last question, but I kind of lied because I'm a journo. James, let me ask you, because you have a 12-week-old son, so there are going to be options and opportunities for him and choices for you to make. What sort of things, based on your own experience, do you think you will inform your decision about your son's education?
Ooh, great question. I think for me personally, I want for my children to have as much association with adults as possible and sit in opportunities to see leadership, to be able to see adults debrief, to be able to have adult conversations. I think it's really important to be with your peers at times, but I think the more you can do that with adults is fantastic as well. So teacher numbers and teacher support and how they work in amongst the students is really important for me. I think an ongoing challenge for our culture is around technology as well, and so it's really important on how schools work with technology and how they use it for a greater good rather than becoming slaves to it. And I think that sometimes it's a challenge for everyone in everyday life. And then if you're going to make an investment like this, there's few times in life where you see people pushing for absolute excellence, and I want to see that goal of being as best as you can at that point in time. It's if you're looking at opportunities, then I'm looking for schools that are looking for excellence. They're my three lists.
They're your ticks. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for your openness and your honesty and for the conversation. It's an important conversation that I think needs to be continued. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining in for the Australian Boarding Schools Summit.